So welcome everyone. Welcome to the online day of meditation. And today is, what is today? 5th of October, 2024, Saturday. And that's in conventional time and place. And I'm coming to you from Winjabul Waibal country in the Bundjalung Nation, which is Lismore, Northern New South Wales, Australia. Thank you very much for sharing your intentions. When we can have a clear intention about where we're going, it's easier to go there. It helps us keep mindful of our direction. Thank you very much. And today the theme is death. And I guess I think of death as probably the best kind of awareness one can have, because it's the only inevitable and certain thing in life that we will die. So today I'll be guiding you in a couple of ways we can reflect on death and contemplate death. And in Buddhist practices, there's many, many different types of death meditations because it's very, very important. And I'll repeat this in the talk, but that I'll give later on today. Contemplating death is like practicing for something very important. Like it's the only certain thing in life, and what we tend to do is avoid it. We tend to we use terror management strategies around it, and what most people tend to do is either not think about it because they feel it's not going to happen to them, which it is. I mean, we all know intellectually we're going to die, but viscerally we just can't kind of get a head around it. It's like there's a book by Yalom called Staring into the Sun. And it's like that. It's like our egos just can't comprehend the fact that we won't be here. So we tend to avoid it. And one way we think about it is that it's not going to happen to me because we just can't understand that reality. And another way we manage it is consider that it's so far off in the future, we don't have to think about it right now. I've got too many other things to think about right now. There's too many other priorities that I have to work on right now rather than thinking about death. Well, there is a saying in Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism. There's a reflection actually, it goes something like this. Considering that death is the only certain thing of life, and what is uncertain is when, what should I be doing right now? What should I be doing right now? And then that reflection is very powerful in order for us to clarify our values, to clarify what's really, really important. If you had, I think there's a course on at the moment. I know some of the MMTCP students that I see participating in this course. It's called 1 Year to Live. And if you live, and it's a course that lasts a year, and you live it as if you've got 1 year to live, and there's all practices around that. And it's about doing what we need to do if we only had 1 year to live. Well, in a little bit later, I'll guide you in a meditation as if we are breathing our last breath. And it's a practice. It's a mindfulness of mortality practice, actually. But it'll be as if this is your last breath. What should you be doing right now? How should you be approaching this last moment? And it's a good way to practice. So coming back to what Analio talks about, and I'll mention this again in the talk, and the talk, by the way, that I'll give at 11 o'clock, or I'll offer at 11 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. We're still on Australian Standard Time today. Tomorrow it's daylight time. But in the talk, I'll mention how Analio talks about practicing for death. And we practice for a sport. If we're in tennis competitions, we'll go and practice. And if we're an athletic, we'll practice our particular what do you call it? Sport or role or something like that. And if we're facing an exam, we'll study, yet we don't hardly ever prepare for death, which is one of the most powerful, which is the only certain thing that's going to happen. You never know. You could die in this next moment. You never know. So, and in that practicing for death, there are a range, or training for death, basically. There are a range of practices throughout all Buddhist schools and traditions. And I just mentioned one with Tibetan Buddhism, that reflection, given death is certain, the timing is uncertain, what should I be doing now? It's a reflection and it's a contemplation. I'm also aware that in Tibetan Buddhism and in early Buddhism, they have death meditations where you imagine you're dying, and it's a lovely meditation. Well, can you say it's lovely? I'm not sure if it's lovely, but it's a very powerful meditation. Uh, and I've got if anybody wants a copy of this, I can send them links. Analia does it well, and on a retreat that Lisa Brown and I did in 2001, which I recorded, we devoted a day to death awareness, and Lisa gave a talk on death, and in the following day, I did some death meditations, and this one was included. Basically, it was following along the lines of the script that I listened to Analio's version of it, and I wrote the script out and I did it as best I could according to his script. But basically, it goes through the processes of death, like what happens when we die, and like the losing the connection with, well, the elements of our body dissolving away, for example, like feeling very heavy and unable to move, like earth element starts to dissolve. Um, Having water express or fluid express from our body, water element is starting to dissolve. Um, uh, and we become really cold. Fire element is beginning to dissolve away. And then the last one probably is air element. And we can experience air element in the way as movement and as changing sensations. And with air element, we eventually stop breathing. So it's going through these stages. And in another meditation I've practiced and I've seen the scripts for is the Tibetan Mahayana approach to death, which is, I mean, it's a little bit more involved than what I just mentioned with an Alio script, which is from early Buddhism. Um, and it goes into entering, being reborn in a bardo realm. A bardo is a kind of intermediary state. And Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism talks about um, going through the bardo realms or the bardo states. Um, and they say that they last for 49 days or 40 days. And this is a particular state where you are met with particular challenges and visions and all sorts of things coming forth, um, challenging you and or inviting you to engage with them. And that's a whole approach to practicing for death. And they go into great details about this. And there's something called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is guidelines for the deceased person to go through. So there are many ways to contemplate death, as I'm mentioning. And in Theravadan Buddhism, I've practiced mostly within Theravadan Buddhism or early Buddhism. The there is there are five recollections, and I will invite you to practice these five recollections shortly. They are the reflections on aging, sickness, death, being parted from everything that we call mind, and also the fact that our actions are our only true possessions. Our actions are our only things that we can take with us when we die. So it's a reflection on that. And that's really powerful. I did that reflection when I was in a lot in Thailand. In fact, I did it probably a couple of times a day. When I was in Thailand, I was quite ill with malaria and hepatitis, and though I was very young, I wondered whether I was going to reach the age of 25 at that time. So I reflected on death a lot. And that was one practice that I did. And I continued to do that practice um, daily for years. And I've been a bit slack lately, but I only do it every now and then, maybe once a week or something like that. But it's a good practice to do. And the Buddha recommended that all people, whether lay or monastic, contemplate these five recollections. So that's another way of considering impermanence. And yet another practice that I've engaged in is the four establishments of mindfulness. The four establishments of mindfulness are, well, it's called Satipatthana in Pali. They are, um, the four establishments are body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And it's about contemplating these experiences. And there's various ways of being mindful, like being present with these experiences. And in the mindfulness of body component or the domain of these practices, there are a number of ways we practice mindfulness of body. One of them is called mindfulness of the mortality of the body. And technically or traditionally, the way we do this is we go to a charnel ground, or have we find someone, we go to where someone has died, and we set in our mind, we focus on a decaying corpse, and we pay attention to that corpse. And I mean, I've actually done this uh, in the charnel grounds of in Thailand, um, at ceremonies. I've gone to where they're burning a body, not a charnel ground, but um, a cremation of a body, and I've watched this body on the fire and seen it decay and come back the next day, and so on and so forth. Then I've done other practice related to this, but it is a very powerful thing to contemplate a decaying body, and the message is, at all stages of decay. Sorry, the message is, just like that body is decaying with the death process, so is this body decaying. This body is also dying. And so in this particular practice, I do this particular practice. I've done that particular practice as contemplating corpses, and then bringing to mind a vision or a sign of that contemplating that decaying corpse. And it might be the skeleton, or it might be a freshly deceased corpse. And then I bring that reflection to myself. Just like that, I'm like this. I'm like, just like them, I will be like that. And when I did the training in Satipatthana with Analia, he presented this particular meditation in a very, very interesting way. He talks about seven spokes of Satipatthana, seven spokes of seven areas that we go through. And the first area is contemplation of the body in terms of its component parts, like skin and bones and flesh and so on. The second spoke is contemplation of the elements, and we've done this, I think we've done this on this group a couple of times, where you contemplate the elements like earth, water, fire, and air. And the way we do that is kind of scanning our body up and down, perceiving these elements. And then from that one, there is contemplating mortality of the body. And the way he does this one is coming from the contemplation of air element, which is eventually being aware of the breathing. We imagine that it is our last breath. We consider that could be my last breath. And we also can bring a vision of a corpse into mind, and ourselves as a corpse, if that's okay with you. I mean, you've got to work with what's okay with you. And I was doing this a bit earlier today. Oh, was it earlier in the week? I was doing this very meditation, and I brought to mind my deceased brother-in-law, um, who died just before the retreat I ran a couple of months ago. I went before I came to the retreat. I went down and visited him. He was already dead by the time I arrived, and they pulled out the corpse, and I said my goodbyes to my brother-in-law. And I also just noticed that when you look at a corpse, there's something distinctly different about them. It seems like their spirit is gone, and a there's a certain look, and it's a kind of plasticity about them, and you touch them and they're cold, and um, so when I was doing this meditation with myself uh, a few days ago, it was like I brought my brother-in-law to mind. I saw him in my mind's eye, and then I thought, well, just like that, I'm going to be just like that, and I visualized myself at the same time as breathing in, breathing out, and thinking, this could be my last breath. This could be my last breath. And if it's not my last breath, it's one breath closer to death. So I will invite you in the uh, in the events in the meditations that we'll do later in a few minutes. Actually, I'll invite you first of all to the 5 recollections, because I think they're wonderful recollections. They're just fantastic. You know, they just as powerful now when I'm now 60, almost 69, but I was doing these when I was 20 and 21 and 22. Just as powerful now as ever, for me anyway. And then I'll invite you to, I was wondering whether I should do all the first 3 spokes on that wheel of awareness or the wheel of mindfulness that Analia talks about. But I thought, oh no, I'll just do the elements. I'll invite you to scan with your mind through the body, uh, perceiving the elements, the elemental nature, which is actually perceiving sensations of different types. And I'll invite you to being aware of different types of elements, um, the different elements, sorry. And then I'll invite you to practice that breathing as if it is our last breath. And if you feel so inclined, you might like to bring to mind something you've seen that's dead or corpse, or bringing to mind something, uh, a, a vision of that, or a remembering of what that was like to see a corpse, and then remembering that you too are of that nature. What I find I do, and I'm just kind of, I hope I'm not um, projecting onto what you should do with this, but what I do when I'm doing that is I think about what I need to let go of as I die, because we can't take anything with us. Um, what do I let go of? And it's like on that out breath, I say, let go. And I let go of my ego. I let go of you know, I'm looking in a room and I'm surrounded by objects that I think that are mine. I have to let go of all of them. Um, Even though my partner's not in this room and my children and my grandchildren aren't in this room, I have to let go of them. I have to let go of everything. So it's a practice in letting go, which, in other practices, we do this practice of letting go. For those of you who have done mindfulness of breathing with me or with someone else, the last 4 steps of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing, the last 4 steps is about insight. And the last step, the final step, is about letting go. So that's what we'll be doing today. And I'll just give you an idea of the agenda. As always, we'll do. I'll invite you to two guided meditations or 2 guided exercises, and then we'll have some silence before we break from morning tea at we break for morning tea usually at about 20 to 11 on Eastern Australian Eastern Standard Time today. And then we come back at 11 AEST, sorry, and I'll invite you to listen to a Dharma talk. The Dharma talk's actually from something that I wrote 37 years ago, which is interesting. And I was trying to whittle it down last night. I think I've got whittled it down a little bit. And so we usually have a Dharma talk for about, the Dharma talks are usually about 55 minutes long or an hour long or something like that. Then we have some discussion, and if it's time, we might do some more meditation. Then we break at 12:30 for lunch, which is an hour. Then we come back at 1:30, and you can have the option of one long silent meditation or two 30-minute meditations. And it's in silence. There's no guidance or anything like that. If you're walking, if you do go out walking, you can turn your camera off. But if we're sitting together, it's really nice to have a picture of each other sitting together. It sort of strengthens that sense of community. So if you can, while you're sitting here, leave your cameras on. And then at 2:30, we have some Dharma discussion, which is basically a roundup of the day, how everyone went, and any questions or so on. Questions or comments or sharing that may be relevant for you. Okay. So I'm just going to turn off the recording now, and we'll get ready for a guided 5 recollections.